and welcome to the Jessie James Facebook page. Today is the 4th of November. I did have to double check myself because most of the time I have no clue. I program my things to do list into my mobile phone and then I just go where it tells me. If somebody hacked that and told me to go places, I'd probably just go. How are you all? I hope that life is treating you as well as it is possibly able to do so. So in the UK we've had about a week of awful rain and now we've got some beautiful sunshine. It's very chilly but still. How are things where you are? Do pop by and say hello to Jem, that's me. I'm broadcasting to you from the United Kingdom. And just say hi to everyone who's going to join us this morning, I want to say, Eastern Standard Time. You know what I'm like, I literally have no idea what's going on at any given time. Just while we're waiting for everybody to gather, we'll have a bit of a natter. Let's see what you've been up to today. Let's have a look and see if that is working. Hello, says Donna. Hello, my darling. How are you? This all looks very different. Facebook has literally changed how everything looks from like 3 minutes ago when I did a test video on a different page. All looks completely different. Never mind, hopefully I'll be able to see what's going on. Oh, I don't know, I can't keep up with this. Where are you calling in from, Donna? Whereabouts are you in the world? I hope you've had as beautiful a day as you possibly can. Melissa is coming in from California. Anne is in from California. And Amber Langto is in. Hello and good morning to you, my lovely. I hope you've all had a beautiful day thus far. Let's see who else is in. Monica is in. Hello, sweetness. Let's just give you a quick show of what we're going to look at today. So this cabochon I've actually borrowed from the Loch Ness mix, and we're going to be working with Adobe Sunrise today. These are all parts of the Colour Alloy range. And all of the beads on this part of the necklace come in this beautiful collection. Now, carnelian is a warm favourite of mine, a firm favourite. And this is no way a poor piece of carnelian. It's absolutely glorious. You've got what I love to see in carnelian. You've got the banding. I hope that you can see that with the light casting down through that there. But you've got almost like a thumbprint banding on this piece. It's absolutely beautiful. What I have done sneakily is I've rifled my collection and I've got a massive cab. This is one from my private collection, but what it will do is it will enable me to show you some of those techniques a little bit more clearly. What we're going to learn to do today is how to net a cabochon. So this almost works like a locket. If I flip the piece over, you've got a back section and a front section, and then we very simply wind them together as if we're sewing. Looks complicated, totally isn't, and you can size this down to really quite small cabochons. I'm going to show you the full piece because I've borrowed some of the enamel drop chain which I had in a box just recently. This is almost like a turquoisey colour, and I thought it went quite nicely with the Loch Ness flavoured cab that I borrowed. You also, in the Adobe Sunrise, get this really lovely clasp. And a clasp, honestly, I think you can never be too glamorous with a clasp. If you're going to wear your hair up, it's nice to have something a little bit exotic around the back. And that's a beautiful piece that matches in gorgeously with the Adobe Sunrise colours. So Monica says hello to everyone. South Carolina but born in England, says Donna. Whereabouts were you born, Donna? I was born in Shakespeare's Stratford-upon-Avon. Just going to put my face up here for a second. Hello. Good morning to you. Anybody from the UK side, or are we all stateside this morning? Has it been a beautiful day so far for you? So what we normally like to do is have a bit of a chat just while everybody joins us, just to make sure that nobody misses the beginning of the tutorial. So we're going to learn to create a safe and secure backing for your cabochon, which can be sized down to really quite small cabs. When I first started working with cabs, and if you've not heard the expression before, it refers to a gemstone which has a flattish back and a domed top. Now there are many different forms. You can have very high domed cabs. You can have cabs which are almost completely flat, more like a slice than a cab. What we're looking at today in the Adobe Sunrise collection is a very classical cabochon. It's carnelian, a beautiful gemstone, been worn in jewellery for literally millennia. Gorgeous collection, and I love the colours. I've got to show you, I made a little brooch of leaves from a maple tree in my garden earlier, and I'm really feeling it's very wintry outside, but it's feeling very autumnal in my heart. Born in Newbury, says Donna, and I'm sorry, I'm going to pronounce your name incorrectly, I'm sure. Suha is in Africa, so hello to you all, you lovely, lovely people. So let's have another quick look down on the overhead. All of these beads come in the Adobe Sunrise collection, and this fabulous cab and the clasp at the end. I have borrowed this from Loch Ness, and I've added the enamel drop chain, or dangle chain I think it's known as, from a box that I had delivered recently. So I've popped both of those links in for you if you need to grab hold of those. It's quite a large collection that you get with the Adobe Sunrise. And there's a couple of pieces that also I didn't quite get around to using, which is some goldstone and a couple more spacers. So it's quite a large collection that you're looking to work with this piece, which is absolutely fabulous. Now, if you were with me last week, you know I haven't been terribly well, so if my voice goes a tad croaky today, please do forgive me. Hopefully I'm slightly louder than I was last week, because it was almost had to use sign language, which unfortunately I've never learned, so that would have been a bit sad, really. Virginia says, hi, I have a hammered aluminium creamer that was made in Stratford-upon-Avon. That is where I was born. Still looking for the sugar bowl, but these pieces are difficult to find in the US. Well, do you know what? I don't think I've ever seen a hammered aluminium sugar bowl, but feel free to send me a photo and I'll keep an eye out. Perfect pronunciation, hooray! Lovely piece that is. Looking forward to learning from you today. That's so kind of you. I'm really pleased that you're able to join me today. We're just going to hang out for a couple of more moments. Feel better soon, Jem, says Donna. Thank you, my lovely. That's very, very kind of you. I do appreciate all of your well wishes. Certainly a bit more volume to me this week. I was very, very quiet last week, and again, apologies for that. Can't be helped. So we're going to have another quick look on the board, and the reason we have this little bit of a chat at the beginning is just to make sure that everybody manages to join us online and they don't miss out on the beginning of the tutorial. So if you think I'm being a little bit chatty, there's a reason to it. Don't go anywhere, we'll get cracking very soon. So I'm going to create a piece. I'm going to capture a cabochon, and this process is known as netting. And I'm going to capture that in this formation in a silver colour round wire. Now I'm using 2 gauges of wire today. The heavier wire is 18 gauge. You could work in 16 gauge if you wanted to, either or, does not matter one jot. And the finer gauge wire is a 26 gauge. Now you could work in either 24 or 28. You'll get a feel for it when you start working with this design. You'll get a feel for what is going to work best with you. Excuse me. Sherry has joined us. Hello, my lovely. Thank you so very much. Just to let you know, what I have done is I've borrowed a cab from my collection. This is not in the colour Alloy collection, Adobe Sunrise. This is one that I'm going to be showing you how to create this piece, because it's huge, frankly. I quite like having large cabochons to work with, but that one is oversized even for me. And what it will allow me to do is to show you the process a little bit more clearly. And then we will finish up the hour showing you how this all works on the slightly smaller scale. This is a perfectly workable cabochon size. Pretty sure it's almost the same size as the Loch Ness collection piece is. So just to remind you, this is not included in the pack. It's a stunt cabochon that we'll be using. Rosanna is in. I suppose it's afternoon for you. It is. Weirdly enough, it's just after 3 p.m. today, and I think your clocks might change coming weekend. Ours changed last weekend, so it's all a bit confusing at the moment. Week after next, we'll be back to normal. Donna says hi. Lovely. Okay, so let's have a closer look at what we're going to create. What I will do, these are all beads that you receive in the Adobe Sunrise Colour Alloy collection. You also get the clasp. I'm just going to put the cabochon up in the corner so you can use that for reference. And the beading order, what I'll do is I will ask our lovely Danielle to pop a photograph up of the complete piece later. So if you wanted to recreate that, you can see the bead order. These swags are created just adding a section of 26 gauge wire and just dropping those beads down around these absolutely gorgeous spacer beads. So again, just going to pop that up in the corner. Let's pop the Adobe Sunrise paperwork out of the way. And what we're going to do is to create two halves to this section before we get that working. So I'm going to pop in with the large cab as well, and just make sure that we can be reassured this doesn't come in the pack. I'm just going to use it to show how to get these sections up and working. This is what you get in the Adobe Sunrise. So I've cut myself an 18-inch section of the 1mm gauge round wire. I'm working with silver colour wire today. You could work with whatever colour you fancy, and as always what we're going to do is make sure that that's nice and smooth and warmed through. So I'm going to grip hold of one end of that with my flat pliers and just run that between thumb and forefinger. Now 18 inches will be more than enough for what you need for the Adobe Sunrise cabochon, which is a carnelian. Thank you very much, Anne, I appreciate that. What we're going to do is just pop these up to the top so you can keep an eye on what we're going to make. Pop that cab out of the way for a moment. I'm going to start off with my round nose pliers and just create a nice open coil to begin with. So gripping hold of the end there, it doesn't need to be too tight in the centre. I'm just going to start by spiralling that around. Once I've got that spiral started, I'm going to squash that down just a little bit and get with a nice open spiral. Now the reason I've got this on screen here, the spiral that you will make for your Adobe Sunrise Carnelian cabochon is smaller than the one I'm making right now. I'm making a massive one to go on the back of my stunt cabochon, just so that you can see the process more easily. You'll need to size that down. And again, 18 inches of that round, either 18 or 16 gauge wire will be plentiful. So I'm just moving the pliers small amount at a time just to create a nice open spiral. I would draw your attention to the fact that it's a much smaller spiral on the Adobe Sunrise cab. And I'm just going to lay this over the back of our stunt cabochon so we can see how that's moving. So once I've got a nice central section, I'm just going to allow that to start forming a shape that will be to replicate the outside of your cabochon. So because we warmed that wire, it's really quite flexible and happy to work with you. So what we're going to do is just draw that into position and sit it over our cabochon. So if I pop the Adobe Sunrise Carnelian into position and pop that, whoops-a-daisy, it's got a mind of its own today. Pop that over the top, you can see that it's just slightly larger than that cabochon, just slightly larger, but you've got that nice spiral that sits down in the middle. Now we're not going to worry about the fact that the spiral is up at the top at the moment, because what I'll do is I'll draw that down in just a hot second. So because we warmed that wire, it's really quite keen to be helpful. So what I'm looking for is a line that chases all the way around the outside of my cab that is just slightly larger than the piece we're looking to work with. What I need to do now is start coiling at the end of the wire, another coil, and what I'm going to do is run that in reverse. So just a little bit of heat and warmth onto the end of the wire here, and I'm going to create another spiral operating in the opposite direction. So if I start that spiral off, you can see we've got that spiral coming around in this direction, so the wire is coming up at the top to create the opposite spiral. So again, it doesn't have to be too tight or too small, it's entirely up to you. What I would say is if you leave a hole in the middle or an empty area in the centre at the top, it gives you the opportunity to pop something in later on to make that into a bail if you want to. So I'm not going to make that overly neat or tidy, but you can take a little bit more time to make that super neat and tidy if you want to. So now the reason I'm leaving a gap in the spiral, you can see that coming through, I hope. The reason that there's a gap between the lines of wire on that spiral is that I want to weave the two sides together, and I will show you exactly what I mean in just a moment. So I'm going to run this spiral all the way along until it sits top centre. And one thing I would say is when you're working with cabochons, when you're working with the wire, you can quite often slightly misshape the wire itself. So very frequently I will pop that back into position and make sure that I haven't gone too far. So you can see I've gone just a little bit too far with my coiling. So all I will do is just run that back, pushing it against my thumb until that sits at the top centre. Now the next thing that I'm going to do is to draw this section and this section together. If I pop it over the cab, you should be able to see quite neatly. I'm going to start wiring these two pieces together, and once they are secured together, we can start messing around with the positioning of the spiral that sits behind the cab and the spiral that sits up at the top. So I'm just going to grab a short length of my 26 gauge round wire, and again I'm working with silver colour wire today. Let's have a look and see what's going on here. My streaming software just said that I was disconnected, but I hope that you are all indeed still there. Hopefully you can still see what's happening. It happened last time as well, something a little bit gremlin-y with Facebook, or Meta as I believe it is now known. So I'm just going to make sure that that cab still fits basically inside the lines that I've created with this form. And this is going to be our framework. So once that framework is, I'm pretty happy with how that's looking. What I'm going to do is a little bit of figure of 8 weaving around the spiral above and the line that forms the outside of our cabochon framework. So I've only got about 6 inches or so of that 26 gauge wire. I'm just going to lay that across the top of the frame wire for a moment and draw it underneath the spiral wire at the top. I'm going to run that around twice at the top. Make those coils nice and neat. Rosanna, I know, also uses her fingernails. Hello everyone, says Sherry. I thought I'd missed this, glad I didn't. I'm glad to have your company, Sherry. Thank you for coming in. Rosanna says here, but freezing for a few seconds every once in a while. Thought that might be mine. I think Facebook Meta is having a few little moments, so apologies if Facebook is being wicked. Just bear with us, and if there's anything that you miss, shout at me and I can recap it easily. So I've wrapped twice around the wire that leads up to the spiral at the top, and that wire comes over the top and down between the spiral wire and the frame wire. What I'm going to do is make sure that they sit neatly side by side, and then draw the fine gauge wire tail up and inside the frame itself. So what I'm going to do here is circle twice around that frame wire, so that's once and then twice, before I push that back into the centre. And again, every time you do a couple of steps, just make sure that that still fits around your cabochon. So that's tightened up slightly, so I'm just going to move that over to make sure that there's space for my cab to sit inside. Now if the shape changes slightly, don't worry. At this stage we're just making sure that there's enough space. Once we've tied this together neatly at the top, what we can do is manipulate the frame so that it fits that cabochon shape perfectly. So my finer gauge wire has gone over the top of the frame wire, underneath that spiral. So a little tip for you, you can just open up that spiral, make your life super easy. So finer gauge wire comes underneath, and we're just wrapping around a little section that leads up to that coil at the top. So that's once and twice. And then we flip back down so that we're wrapping now against the frame, once and twice. And it's basket weave or figure of 8 weave, and we're just wrapping twice around the frame, then twice around the section that leads up to the coil at the top. So that's once and twice at the top, push that down into position, and then once on the frame wire, push the tail up, twice on the frame wire. Now this was only about 6 inches or so of that lighter gauge 26 gauge wire. You can make that slightly heavier, 24 gauge, or even slightly lighter, 28 gauge, but my preference would be for 26. So I'm just giving that a gentle squeeze to make sure that it fits around the outside of that cabochon. We don't want it to be smaller than the cab. It can be a little bit larger or just even slightly baggy if you prefer. It doesn't really matter as long as it's not smaller than the size, which is why my cab is face down. So I'm just going to do a couple more wraps at the top. That's 2 around the spiral wire, 2 around the frame wire, and then we're going to finish off on this side, whoops-a-daisy, with 2 around that spiral wire. Now what I want to do is make sure that when I cut this away, there's a little tiny extra residue, which means that I can chase the tail of the wire I've just cut and make that sit down, and it will be hidden. Just chase that wire around carefully, and then when you put that spiral back down into position, any jagged edges are hidden from hurting you. So my finger passes either side without catching on anything because we've hidden that tail away, the end section. So if I flip this back to the way we were looking at it a second ago and hold it over the cabochon, you can see that our shape is reasonably good, but we can manipulate that because we warmed the wire first. We can manipulate that gently until it fits perfectly. You can do that with pliers if you prefer. What I will do is finish a little bit more weaving on the other side. So this is currently upside down. Hi Jem and Sarah at JBB. That's Maria in. Hello my darling, good to see you. I hope you're well. So again, I'm going to continue with my basket weave. So what I'm doing here is I'm looping the finer gauge wire around the central coil section, that's once, that's twice, before I return to wrapping around the frame. You could go for 3 and 3 if you wanted to. I've just decided to go for 2 and 2 because, well, why not? It worked for Noah. So just going to tighten those wraps up every couple of steps and stages, and what I'll do is I will finish this piece off for you so you can see what that should look like. So that's 2 on the central coil wire, and then 2 around that outer frame wire. Now you can, like Rosanna and myself, use your fingernails to tighten those up, or you can use your pliers if you prefer. Now the wire's getting slightly tense now, so I probably will revert to using the pliers. Pull that through neatly, and I think that's probably enough to keep that nice and safe and secure. So I'm going to finish off on the coil wire with 2 wraps around the coil before I just post that up between the coil and the frame, pull that up and over the top, and I'm now going to get as close as I can inside the frame wire like so, before trimming that away and getting rid of it. Again, I want to make sure that that sits nice and flush and sits as close in between the frame as possible. Now if you ever see me holding a weave that I've just done where there's a fine wire rather on top of a heavy wire, I'm not pressing very hard. It's a very, very delicate little moment just to set that wire. Now you can see that that shape isn't exactly perfect, so what I would do is just take a moment to make sure that that fits my cabochon, preferably just around the outer edges. So you can see if I push that down, it fits over the top, which means that that is the perfect size. If I flip that over and sit it on top, you can see that that's going to work for us perfectly. Now the next thing that we've got to do is to fill in some of this empty space with yet more of that 26 gauge wire. So I'm going to pop my dark cabochon back in because it will help me to show you where the wires are going to sit. The first thing that I want to do is just bring that coil and open it out slightly so that it sits a little bit more centrally to that framework, like so. And I'm going to grab myself, I've got around about 24 inches of round 26 gauge wire. Now this is silver colour wire. You can use obviously whatever colour wire you want to use, but I think it looks beautiful with the Adobe Sunrise. Equally, an antique bronze or copper would look also perfect. So what I need to do is find a place on my spiral to, now I'm going to refer to a knitting term, I'm not a knitter in the slightest, but I'm going to cast on. I'm imagining this is my yarn or my thread and I want to cast on to somewhere safely. What we're doing is we're finding a point to attach the beginning of our finer gauge wire. It's 26 gauge round wire. Now because this is a substantial piece, I'm going to wind on probably 4 times. For your smaller pieces, 2 or 3 times will be enough. And what we're going to do is just take that tail all the way around a section of the central spiral. So I'm going to do that by hand as much as I possibly can before reverting to my bent chain nose pliers. Now it's fiddlier to show on camera than it is to do in actual real life. So what I'm doing there is I'm making sure that that tail sits very neatly around that central spiral. I'm going to get that little neat coil attached onto the central spiral. Now you can begin and end wherever you wish to on the spiral. What we're looking to do here is infill. So if I show you my tiny piece just here, what we're looking to do is infill to connect the spiral to that outer framework. And what that does is it stops your cabochon from falling down the gap. Mind the gap. If you've ever been to London, you'll know that vocal very, very well. So what we're going to do is a little bit more back and forth. Now you don't have to be incredibly neat and tidy. You don't have to be very, very precise about how many, how far apart or how many wraps. On this piece, I've just passed the wire back and forth, which is enough. If you wish to, what you can do is wrap a couple of times around. So my finer gauge wire is sitting over the top at the moment, over the top of that spiral wire. So I'm going to push all of that long tail of wire down between the spiral and the outer framework. So I'm going to make that come across at an angle, gripping that really firmly. If you pull this too hard in this direction, you'll uncoil your little coil here, and you might put out of position the spiral that you've sat in the centre of that framework. Hi Gail, good to have your company, thanks for joining us. So from the finer gauge wire coming over the top, down between those two wires, we're going to come up and around the outside of that frame wire. So that's once, push that residue all the way through. All of that great big long 24 inches or 2 feet of wire has gone through. Now for the next section, what you would need to do is take the finer gauge wire over the top, down, underneath the spiral section, and then we're going to wrap twice around here. Now this is something that you can achieve with a large piece. So all I'm going to do is hook the next little section around that central coil. That's really easy to do when you're working on a larger piece, or if you want to do that on the smaller piece, you'll probably want to work with slightly shorter wire for a piece of this size. So I'm going to push that down now, so we've come over the top, take all of that great big long length of wire down, tighten up those little coils, and we're just going to whiz back and forth a few times. It reminds me of ammonites or ancient sea snails, that kind of thing, up and over the top. So we're always going from the top on one side to underneath. So that's popping underneath, and because we've got a little bit of space to work with, that's come back over the top. So the wire goes underneath, around, over the top and back down in the centre. So again, I'm pulling that great big long tail of wire that's just decided to collect all of my pliers back in this direction. And I'm just going to continue on in exactly the same way. So on a smaller piece, what you can do is just go back and forth. You don't have to do that double wrap. I think it looks super attractive if you do that double wrap, but it's not a prerequisite. Push the wire down. Then we're going to bring that down. I'm using this stunt cab as a little bit of a background so you can see what's going on. Now if it's not completely tense and straight, don't even worry about it. It's not a problem at all. So what I'm going to do is whiz on through this because this is quite repetitive now, but I want to show you the whole process. You don't have to have billions and billions of passes of wire. What you do need to do is have enough coverage on this position that your cab won't sneak through and fall out the back of the design. So again, over the top, down between the two, underneath the frame wire. I'm just going to support the frame wire, pull that tail all the way through once and then twice. And because we've got an open spiral to work with, I'm just sneaking that in. I'm going to support that firmly whilst I bring that wire all the way around, back and down in between those two wires. So you can see how it's building up. It's a little bit floral, but like I say, I like to think of snails or ancient ammonites, such things as that. Take the wire down between the two, the frame and the spiral, up and over the top, back to that central spiral and around. I'm trying to whiz through this because it's a little bit repetitive, but I wanted to show you the whole process and what you can do when you get to the far end. So we're almost completed as far as I would go for a smaller cabochon. If you do want to work this process on a slightly larger cabochon, you can start wiring from the spiral to that first section of the spiral. So if I pop that wire down now, pull that all the way through. Those wire tails do like to collect everything around them. They surely do, Rosanna. So what we need to do now is start wrapping around the coil that comes into the centre of our framework. So that means instead of just wrapping around the outside, I need to post that tail of the wire up, grab a hold of that neatly. Now when you have a piece of wire that's starting to do this, if you've worked it quite hard, this can kink. So I would always be as careful as possible just to ease that through. We're going to take that over the top and down between the outer spiral and inner spiral. Push the tail of wire through, and then again with the very end of that wire coming up and through, I've just collected that wire on my finger to try and ease that through the gap without putting too much more pressure on it. So again, over the top of the outer spiral, underneath that inner spiral, I'm going to wrap that twice around the inner spiral. And I think probably that's as far as we need to go. So I'm going to finish with 4 wraps on that inner spiral, just for a sense of safety and security, and to reflect the 4 wraps we started off with. Now, as I look at the piece like this side is going to be against the cabochon. So this is where I want to truncate that wire. Look twice, cut once. Make sure you're only cutting the single bit off that you want to remove. What can happen is you can accidentally cut one of these wires. If you do, don't scrap the whole project. You can quite easily add more wire in just by wrapping around the next adjacent space to where you accidentally cut. So get that nice and neat and tidy. And if I just pop the cabochon over the front of our safety back, you can see that that's going to work quite nicely in exactly the same way as that carnelian will on the Adobe Sunrise. So I've just brought in a stunt cab with me today to show you on a slightly larger scale how to do the 2 halves of the process. So we've worked this section up together, so I'm going to pop that bit out of the way. The next thing that we're going to achieve is the netting. Now I make this netting in exactly the same way as I make my dream inspired designs. So I will wrap twice around the outside, make a little rainbow, and then from there on I'm almost knitting inwards, one little rainbow at a time. I am going to show you that again on a grander scale so it's easier to see. You'll just want to size that down, and when we get to the end I'll show you how to finish off on the Adobe Sunrise Carnelian. We just pop those side by side so we can see what's happening. So my frame wire, it's a good idea if you're working with a large piece to size up to 16 gauge. I'm working with 18 gauge today, but you can size that up to 16 gauge wire if you're working with a substantial piece, 18 gauge for a standard piece. And yet again, as I always do, I'm going to grab a hold of the end. This is again around 18 inches. And what I'm going to do here is just smooth that between thumb and forefinger. Now I'm working with 18 inches because I have a large stunt cabochon to demonstrate for you. If by any chance you're working with the smaller cabochons, as we have this gorgeous carnelian, you don't need anywhere near as much as that. You will need less than 7 inches, I would imagine, only just a couple of inches to be honest, but I'm working with a larger piece, so I'm going to use a little bit extra just to demonstrate what you need to achieve. So I've smoothed this wire between thumb and forefinger just to get that nice and fluid. It pays to have a really nice, safe background. Now I've got one of my wooden coloured boards today, and this is non-scratch. If you're pressing a gemstone down into a surface, beading mat is perfect, but also a flat paper or a smooth surface, just so that you're not scratching it. I need to be able to move that and know that no damage is going to occur. What I want to do now is create a framework that fits just around the cabochon itself. So because I've warmed my wire, I can start by just gently looping that so that it sits around. If this is something that you struggle with, you can find almost any round form of a similar dimension and just ask that to be your guide. So if you're working with the Adobe Sunrise, a ring stick or mandrel is absolutely perfect. But for my stunt piece, what I'm going to do is use the cabochon itself. I'm going to press firmly down on the cab and push the wire around the outside of that cabochon. What I'm looking to do is to get a shape that chases the exact size of the cab that I'm working with. So wire wants to spring open, and that's absolutely fine because we've got the basic shape that we wanted to work with, and now we can manipulate that so that it sits into the correct position. Now I've worked with far too much wire, but I want to show you what it is we're looking to achieve easily, and then you can decide how much wire you want to work with. So to begin with, what I'm looking to do is to get that shape absolutely perfect. So this can take a little bit of time. There's no cheats to this. If you buy a cabochon which is calibrated, which I believe these are calibrated to size, then you can replicate that over and over again by marking on your ring stick whereabouts you will want to get that oval shape to form. So could somebody just give me a quick hello to make sure that you're still there, because my Facebook is showing that it's frozen again, so I just need to see if you're still there and if we are indeed still broadcasting. So I'm just going to keep on with this shape until it fits perfectly, and then we will move on from there. So again, I'm just taking the tails over gently and little by little until I have that perfect shape. Laurie says hello, thank you so much. Donna says hello, Fran says hi, and Anne says hi. Great, we're still broadcasting, happy days. What I'm going to do now is trim away the excess. If you imagine that our oval shape lives in a rectangle, what we're going to do is trim the wire to the edges of the rectangle that this oval lives in the middle of. Very, very simply put, I'm going to trim that wire just there, and you'll see I'm using the flush side of my cutters. Now these two are still perfectly usable pieces, so they're going to go into my scrap pot, which is not a scrap pot, it's a reuse and recycle. Rosanna says hello. Sherry says you freeze in short spurts. I'm still here and learning. Happy to hear that, Gail, thank you. So we have cut our wire now to fit the cabochon. Even my vast cabochon is taking probably only about 6 inches of wire. You don't need a huge amount, especially if you're working in precious metal. You could measure with a string and then pop it on a ruler if you prefer. Entirely up to you. I prefer to just make showing you easier, and I know that I'm going to reuse those pieces. So just to get this to sit perfectly, I'm going to give that one more little try before creating 2 small open loops at the top on either side. So for this I'm going to be using my round nose pliers. Pop that out of the way for a second, and what I want to do is have the 2 loops sitting one on top of the other centrally. If you imagine this is an oval clock face at the 12 o'clock position. So I'm going to start rolling back with my round nose pliers, and I'm going to take that tail just slightly underneath. If I just pop that back down, that should be better for you to see. I'll pop it on the back of the cab. And I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side. Now, if I drop in at the piece for the Carnelian Adobe Sunrise, you can see that they're tiny loops. They're not complete loops, they just go across the top, cross over, and then come back to meet the circuit itself. So if we look at the piece I've just done, what we can do when we're happy with that position, if that's in exactly the 12 o'clock position, we're going to trim away that teeny tiny excess for the scrap pot now. We are going to do that. It is going to fall off, or am I going to stab myself in the finger? Who knows? It's a roller coaster with me. There we go, that got rid of it. So I need to do the exact same thing on the other side, again with those round nose pliers. So I want to start rolling from a little bit away. Ideally the same kind of size as your first loop, but one will be behind the other. If it's imperfect, I'm not going to tell anybody. Let's not worry about it overly, as long as you can get a set of wire through there. So I think probably I need to just tighten that up slightly. So what I would do to tighten that up is open it back out, like so, and just try and get that a little bit rounder, a little bit smoother. Pop that back into position, try it on for size. So you can see what I need to do is tighten them both up a little bit. So this is the joy of teaching live, you get to see what can go wrong. Just going to push that wire so it goes all the way around. Draw those two side by side. Now they seem to match up a little bit better. Happy days. So what I need to do now is take my cab out of the way, come back in with my flush cutters, and you can see we've got a loop coming back on itself. What I want to do is trim just the residue, not the frame wire. So look twice, cut once. When we're happy with those little loops that we've created at the top, I want to make sure that they're nice and strong. Now you can either bring in a small block and a light hammer, tap very, very gently. We want this to be completely flat and we want it to be a little bit firm. So I'm just going to take ever such a tiny smidge off the second wire. Make sure that you police these tiny pieces of wire because they can be very painful if you accidentally stand on them. So I'm just going to make sure that that loop sits back down against the frame and it's nice and flat. Nice and flat. If you are going to hammer these, just hammer the loops first and then very gently hammer around one side and then hammer around the other side, but leave the bottom bit unhammered so that you can cross those two over. You need to have one sitting on top of the other before you then hammer the base. If you hammer the base beforehand, it gets a little bit stiff. So all I'm going to do here is just a very little bit of gentle, I like to call it om-nomming. I'm opening and closing the flat facing pliers. And what we're doing is work hardening that wire to give it a slightly firmer feel, so that it sits slightly tighter and firmer and it becomes less springy. So this is going to go over the front surface of your cabochon. If I pop that one out of the way for a second, this goes on the back, this goes on the front like so. So hopefully that makes sense so far. And what we've created together is the frame here for the front and that back we've worked on together as well. So I pop those back up to the side. I'm going to take the back out of the way. And what we're going to do now is learn how to create the netting. This is a technique of cabochon wrapping called netting. Some people call it netting. I like to think of it as a Dreamweaver design. Now my preference for this is to work with 26 gauge round wire, which I'm just grabbing off the spool now. And I like to work with great big long lengths of it. The reason I like to work with great big long lengths of it is that it gives you an endless wire work. Now, wherever in wire work you join wire together, so say you got halfway round, you got to here, you ran out of wire, it's easy enough to add a piece on, but there's always going to be just a slight weakening of your design. So the first thing that we're going to do is to join the framework to make a complete frame. You will excuse me, I'm ever so slightly not over my flue light. I'm just going to have a very quick drink of water. Sorry about that. So I have got about 2 feet, 24 inches, 60 centimetres of that 26 gauge wire. And what I want to do is post a couple of inches of that through both of those loops at the top of our framework. So I'm going to post that through and have a tail of a couple of inches. And I'm going to wrap 3 times around both of those loops. So the tail of the wire comes up, back through the loop for a second time. You can use your pliers if you struggle to do this. Pull that tail through with the pliers, like so. So that's our second wrap through the loops, and you need to go through both of those loops. Take that wire through for a third time. You can pull that through either with tweezers, by hand, or with your pliers. Thank you so much, Anne, that's very kind of you. I'm a lot better than I was last week, let's put it like that. So we've now got about 1.25 inches of wire just remaining over on the right hand side. I'm right dominant, so I tend to move in this direction where possible. You can simply invert that if you prefer. The tail of wire I'm going to wrap around the shoulder at the going towards 1 o'clock position, and I'm going to go for 4 wraps to make sure that that's nice and secure. I'm going to truncate the wire just here so that the tail, I've just eaten some of my own hair there, sorry about that. The tail of the wire just needs to finish up just inside the framework. So tightening with pliers and then scooching the pliers around in a circular direction to smooth that end. What we have now is 4 wraps around the frame, 3 wraps around both of those loops. If I turn that sideways, you should see 3 wraps around both of those loops. So what we're going to do now is start on the dream weaving. So if I pop the cabochon out of the way for now, this is going to be a series of rainbows appearing around the outside of that frame. Now this is your last chance really to make any manipulations that you need to make. That actually looks reasonably good to the cabochon. When I take the cabochon out, it looks slightly on the wonk. So I'm just going to make sure that I'm happy with that. You can use your thumb to create these on large pieces like so. So that makes a really nice rainbow shape. When you're working on a smaller design, like the one that I'm going to show you how to hold together at the end of the hour, you won't be able to get a thumb in there unless you have really tiny, tiny fairy thumbs. So what you can do instead is use your round nose pliers. I've got an idea, hold tight. If you imagine that we're using the round nose pliers, if I pop them and very, very gently hold the frame, you can use your round nose pliers exactly the same way as I'm using these giant bail makers to create that perfect rainbow shape form. So I'm going to pinch a hold of this form now, and then I'm going to wrap twice around the outside. Now this is where it gets fun if you've got miles and miles of wire on the end. Sorry, I just wonked the camera there. So I'm going to wrap twice around, pull that all the way through. So whether you use a pair of pliers or your thumbnail or any other device, or just go by eye, so I like to form these on larger pieces with the outside of my thumb like so, and by eye I imagine that that looks reasonably similar size wise. I'm going to grip that into position and then wrap twice around the outside, so that's once and twice. Pull that all the way through. Rosanna is talking to me. Hold on, where are we? I tend to flip my piece if I need to go the other direction. Absolutely, yeah. You just do whatever is most comfortable and logical for your brain. So the wire is coming from underneath to over the top. So from underneath to over the top, from underneath to over the top. And I'm just going to go around quite quickly around the outside of this frame, purely because I want to show you the important bit, which is when you move on to the next row. And again, I'm using knitting metaphors, even though I'm not a knitter. So I will use my thumb to create that rainbow shape, like so. Couple of key techniques I want to share with you. One is moving up to the next row, and another is what to do if you run out of wire. So I'm going to pinch that rainbow shape, wrapping twice around that outside frame. This might be a little bit rough. The gauge of the wrapping wire is 26. So another little rainbow down at the bottom. You can be super precise and count your rainbows if you want to. 1 over the top, 2 over the top. You can use a piece of paper with a rainbow drawn on it if you want to repeat. See, mine are getting larger down towards the bottom, but that's because I just want to get to show you how to add the next one. The frame wire is 18 gauge, but you could just as easily use 16 gauge on a larger piece. I wouldn't go any lighter than 18 gauge because otherwise it deforms too easily. So we're looking to finish off in a little while with this gorgeous, that's not a word, gorgeous carnelian. So for this piece, 18 gauge and 26 gauge. So the wire goes again from over the top, makes that little rainbow shape, goes underneath the frame wire, like so. Pull that all the way around, over the top, make that little rainbow shape. Now if you come to the end and you've only got space for half a rainbow, you can either stretch them out so that they completely fit all the way around, which I think is what we're going to do. A little bit of a stretch, and make them fit until you get up to the opposite top to where you started. So we're going to wrap twice again, like so. So we've done a complete row now. We've done our first row. where we've double wrapped around that frame wire I'm using my thumbnail. You could use if you're on a smaller scale, you can use your round nose pliers really easily. So to move up to the next section, what we're going to do is coil very, very carefully around the first half of our first rainbow. So my finer gauge wire is coming over the top. I'm going to push it all down the centre and then take the end and bring the end up inside that first rainbow. Inside the first rainbow, draw the tail up and through, and that is what connects your two rainbows together at the top. So now I need to circle very carefully around the first half of that first rainbow. So push all the wire through, support that, bring the tail up inside that first rainbow. Very, very gently draw that into position. Now I'm pinching the rainbow whilst I draw that wrapping wire so that it comes out at the top. So we've just very, very lazily coiled around the first half of the first rainbow. Now on our second and any subsequent rows, we no longer wrap twice, we're only wrapping once. So the finer gauge wires come over the top. I'm pushing the whole lot down the middle now. Bringing the tail up inside that second rainbow. Inside the second rainbow. Support that finer gauge wire as you bring it through. And then I'm going to pinch between those two rainbows on the first row and draw that wire into position to create that almost like a rainbow shape. Now 26 gauge is the perfect wire to work with because if it gets a little bit of a notch in it, you can straighten it out. Lighter gauge wires don't like that. Heavier gauge wires are much harder to work with in this form. So what I'm going to do now is pinch where those pieces all cross over. So I'm happy with the size of my rainbow. The rainbows, as you move in on subsequent rows, they get smaller. So I'm going to pinch that rainbow in position and then sharply turn that lighter gauge wire. So it's not wrapping, it's just bending on the centre of that first row rainbow. So bring that wire all the way through, curve that around to create the second rainbow shape. Once I'm happy with that, I can bring that tail up inside the second rainbow. Sorry, it's the third rainbow. Do apologise. Rainbow number 1, rainbow number 2, rainbow number 3. So you can see that we're going to repeat that same thing again. I'm going to support that second row in position whilst I create a sharp bend with my finer gauge wire, and I'm going to move on and on all the way around. So the wire comes through, up inside the next rainbow along, pull that into position, try and get a nice shape like so. Pinch that all together, create that sharp bend. Now I'm putting quite a lot of pressure between thumb and forefinger to support everything. Good morning, Linda. What I'm not doing is crushing the rainbow or dinking it with my nails. So you can see that we've got rainbows that are moving around on the second row now. Push the tail of wire all the way through, create the next smooth rainbow form, bring the tail up inside the next rainbow along on the first row, draw that down into position. When you're happy with where that's sitting, pinch it all together. I want that to be centralised, so I'm just going to hold that a little bit further over before bringing the finer gauge wire up to create a bend where you want that to occur. So the wire now goes all the way down the centre, everything goes inside, pull that into position, up inside the next rainbow along. Pull that into position, and then you just continue as you go. Now some cabochons, I'm just going to pop this down for a second while I tell you a story of cabs. This is a very, very large oversized cab which I'm just using to demonstrate technique with you. What it isn't is deep. It's a very shallow cabochon. It has a chamfered edge, so it's a domed top and a flat back. Some cabochons, like the beautiful Loch Ness cab, are deep. So for its surface area on the back, it's quite thick. The carnelian that you have in the Adobe Sunrise is almost perfect proportions for what I would describe as a cabochon. For the section I'm going to sew together in a minute to show you the end of the project, I've only gone for 2 rows. Now those central rows were made using my round nose pliers, and the outer rows were made using the round nose pliers just a little bit further along. So you don't have to use your thumbnail to make gargantuan, you'd only get like 5 on the outside of a frame like this. So the process is the same, but instead of using your nails, you might want to use round nose pliers or bail making pliers. So I'm going to pinch that into position before I make a sharp bend up. That makes quite a nice background. Push all of that tail of wire down, rainbow over the top into position. Hold that up as you want it to appear, and then the tail comes up inside the next rainbow along. I'm getting sick of the word rainbow now. Hold that into position where you think that should sit. Sharp bend with that tail of wire, and then push all of the wire down into the centre of the design. Make sure that you're happy with where that sits. Tail of the wire comes up inside the next rainbow shape along. It's not quite a semicircle because it's got an arc to it. So there's a little bit of a shape that I don't want to see there, so I'm just going to very, very gently flatten that out, pull that into position, make sure I'm happy before making that sharp bend and pushing all of the residue of wire down the centre. Now my wire, because it started out as a very, very long piece, is starting to get tense. If you missed the bit where we moved on to the next row, I'm going to show you that one more time. So my tail of wire is going to come inside this first rainbow that we started with. Draw that all the way around. I want to make sure that I'm happy with that rainbow shape. So that can be a slightly smaller one. Pinch that into position, and what we're going to do now is a very lazy circle around the first half of the next rainbow so we can move up to the next row. So I'm just tying that all together to begin with. Bring the tail up inside, just here. Pull that all the way through, and I'm going to do that another time. Very, very careful not to disrupt the shapes that we've made. Push the residue of wire through, and I'm supporting the rainbow shapes to make sure they don't get disrupted. That end section up inside the next rainbow that we're starting from, and you can continue on as far as you wish to go. I love making these dream inspired pieces. You can go as far as you want to. One thing I would say is you do need at least 2 rows to ensure that your cabochon will be safe, because what we're going to do is push that down. When you get to the end, the process is very, very similar to actually going on to the next row. So all I'm going to do is run the wire in a static position, so 3 little wraps side by side on that first rainbow of the next row. So that's 1, that's 2, and that's 3. And what I'm going to do is flip this over so I'm looking at the underside, like so. Pull that nice and tight. Now this is the side that's going to go against the gemstone. So it is safe for us to have the offcut or the end cut of the wire like so. But I'm just going to make sure that that's flat and as smooth as possible, so it doesn't scratch the gemstone, but also so that it doesn't come undone. Now when you're wrapping 26 gauge on 26 gauge, it's all about a gentle touch, very small movements, very little pressure. So I'm just going to chase that around in a circle to make sure that that's nice and smooth. And then I'm going to push it over the face of the cabochon, like so that it grows like a net and it will fit those 2 sections together. Now I am going to demonstrate with the cabochon that we get in the Adobe Sunrise collection, but these 2 sections come together with the netted segment to the front and the coiled section to the back. And very, very simply, you tie these 2 pieces together. Now, those little loops at the top have come slightly awry. What I want for those to do is to sit snugly against each other. So you might need to take a second just to make sure that they're flat and that they do indeed fit. I am going to move back to our original cabochon that comes in the Adobe Sunrise collection. The cab on the necklace piece here I borrowed from Loch Ness because I wanted to demonstrate the final piece with the cab of carnelian that you get in the Adobe Sunrise collection. So if I pop that over to one side, you can see these are all the other beads, or most of the beads that you get in that same collection. So I'm going to show you how to bring these 2 segments together. This is one of my favourite parts of working with cabochon netting, is when you've got this flat front section and you've created this dream woven. This has actually got 3 rows on it because it's a nice cabochon to work with. So my favourite part is pushing the cabochon up into that netting, because it grows like one of those string bags from the 1970s that are making a big comeback. You just push that down over the face of the cabochon, and once that's taken a shape, can you see that that's now like a little fruit bowl? Your cabochon will now sit safely inside. You can also do that by hand if you prefer. What can happen if you have a deep cabochon and you only do 1 or 2 rows is that your cab will pop straight through, and then you'll know that you needed to do more rows. So I tend to err on the side of caution. So I've gone for 3 rows with this one. And what we're going to do is start by adding some wire, and again we're going to be using 26 gauge wire. We just need to find a safe point to cast on to that frame. And I've got a section of wire here which is around about 12 inches in length. It is round 26 gauge, far more than we need. However, I want to have enough to work with. So what I tend to do, because I'm right dominant, is start top right at around about the 1 o'clock position. You can start wherever you fancy. I'm going to start by wrapping 3 times around that frame wire, just to get a really good strong connection. So hopefully, if I pop that dark cabochon underneath, you should be able to see where I'm at. What I'm going to do, as I say, is just wind on 3 times, coiling around the outside frame. And this is the back section, not the front section. So that's 1 really strong wrap. Take that tail up and around that frame wire again. Push that up into position. 2, and then that's the 3rd wrap. Now what I would do for a piece that I was going to sell is I would take that tail of wire and I'd make sure that it sat inside the frame so it won't ever impact the skin. We are at the end of our hour now, and I want to show you the complete process so you can take a few seconds extra just to make that super neat and tidy. So the first step is to, without the cabochon, bring the 2 halves of our piece together. And I'm just going to make the first stitch. So I want the 12 o'clock position to appear on top of the 12 o'clock position, like so. And all I'm going to do is sew around the outside of both of those to bring them together. My first stitch happens without the cabochon in position. So I'm going to take that tail of wire and post it inside the frames of both of those sides. Hi Margaret, lovely to see you, my darling, all the way from Edinburgh. So I'm going to pull that nice and tight. That's my first stitch in position. Now it opens a little bit like a clamshell or like a lucky locket. Pop that cabochon back into position, and now is the time it will want to try and escape. So you need to just press that a little bit firmly. Take the tail of the wire and sew all the way around the outside. So the wire is popping through. It normally is 4 PM lovely, but we changed to our winter time, Greenwich Mean Time, a week before the United States. So you can watch me on Catch Up Treasure. So I'm going to continue all the way around the outside. So I'm just going in between the gemstone and the outer framework. I'm trying not to interrupt any of the other wire weaving that's going on. So as I come over the top, the wire pokes in through one of those little rainbows, through the back section. Continue all the way around. So we're just sewing things together. When people start thinking about wire weaving, wire work, they can sometimes be a little afraid of it, but 99% of it is just wiring stuff together. And it's trying to do it neatly. So that's a little bit loose and baggy just there. So I want to make that nice and neat, but without deforming the shapes that we've created, because they fit our cabochons so neatly. Pull that tail all the way through. Get those wires to sit exactly where you want them to. So I try, if I wasn't on a deadline, to get those to line up super neatly. Push that all the way through, and if it does get a little bit tight, that's probably because the end of that wire is getting a little bit tired. So we're just going to continue all the way around. You can open that out if you need to, or if it doesn't want to be incredibly tricky, just do that one side at a time. So I've just captured the top section. Now I'm going to use my nail to open up the underside, pull that wire through. So that's those two halves almost completely sewn together now. Last couple of moments, and again the wire is getting a little bit tired by this time because it's been used like a thread, and it's not a thread. So I've captured the top wire. I want to take that inside the frame, just on the back there. There we go. It does go through. Push that into position, and then we've got literally just one more stitch to create before we find a place to cast off, as it were. Pushing it through from this side might be a little bit easier. Yeah, it's gone into position quite nicely. So your cab is now completely captured, completely safe. And it's much easier than it actually looks. It looks like a complicated and tricky, difficult piece to create, but if you slow it down and make those two halves first, when you start off, put that first stitch in without the cab in position. All we're looking to do now is find a place to finish off. So I'm not going to do it now because it's very, very fiddly, probably quite dull for you to see. I'm just going to pass that wire through one time, just on the rear again, on the back section, and hopefully you can see we've got some space here, a little bit of space just there to wrap 3 times around just the rear section. So we started wiring on here, and we're going to end on wiring here, with our cabochon obviously captured in the middle. So let's put my face back. Oh, my mouse has gone to sleep. That's hilarious. I hope that you have enjoyed that, my lovelies. It's something that I actually learnt to do quite late in the day. I learnt this about 6 or 7 years ago, maybe, after I'd done a lot of different wire weaving. So this is something that I came to a little bit later, but I really, really enjoy the process. The whole thing is actually quite therapeutic, and it's the same process that I use to create my Web of Dreams designs. So thank you very much for being with me today. That was your Colour Alloy Adobe Sunrise collection. Just before I head off, I'm going to show you the piece on the board one more time so you can appreciate the beautiful beads that we've used today. Linda says that's pretty, thank you very much. Let's pop you back down here. So in the Adobe Sunrise you get the clasp, you get all of those beads, you get a handful more beads as well that I didn't put in the piece. They're very pretty. And this section comes in your Loch Ness, but everything else comes from that Adobe Sunrise. Really, really beautiful. Donna, that's very, very kind of you. Thank you ever so much. Let's put my silly face back up for a second. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I'm sorry the interweb's been a little bit sketchy and been a bit stop-start for you. I never know if it's at my end or if it's just Facebook being a bit Facebooky. I think it was Facebook being a bit Facebooky today. Have yourself a beautiful afternoon. Thank you for hanging out with me, and if they'll have me back, I shall be back with you next week at 11 AM Eastern Standard. By that time it'll be back to 4 PM British as well. Take care, loves. Mwah. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you very, very soon. Bye.